kumenyekanisha ibicuruzwa byawe. Ukeneye kumenya aho wagurira ibyo wifuza mu buryo bwihuse kandi bworoshye. dador.com ni urubuga rukorohereza ndetse rukanagufasha kwamamaza no kumenyekanisha ibicuruzwa byawe. Gusura urubuga rwa dador.com kenshi biguhesha kandi amahirwe yo gutsindira iPhone. Hamwe na dador.com birihuta, birizewe kandi biroroshye.
To your perspective, to explain to Americans why it's important for America to remain engaged with Rwanda and to remain engaged with Africa. And Rwanda it's a stable, thanks in large measure to your extraordinary leadership since 1994, a stable and small African country. But I wonder if you might share with us the issues that you believe require greater focus in relation to smaller countries, when so much of the focus these days, when we do talk about foreign policy, we talk about great power competition. But what are the stakes for the future of U.S. engagement with the countries of Africa, and why should Americans pay more attention to the continent?
Well, General, Africa, first of all, is the fastest growing continent in the world in terms of population and economy as well. So Africa of 1.2 billion people, I think if one looked at that in its entirety, somebody should find that associating with Africa is beneficial. And for example, Africa and the United States, if they worked together, it would benefit both Africa and the United States than when you have Africa dealing with individual countries or ignoring them altogether. But I can understand where some in the United States come from. United States is a big country, it's a powerful country, it's very wealthy, it's, has technology, all kinds of whatever is needed. It goes to a point that sometimes people get lost into that and think they don't need others, or including even small countries, to associate with, to grow, and to have the influence, in fact, that people or big countries want to exercise, and that's what underlies big powers competition. So Africa, or individual countries of Africa, would make the difference if we were to have United States associate with Africa. But for small countries like Rwanda, it's very difficult if you look at Rwanda as a small country in isolation and not in the context of the continent. So it is difficult to maintain a predictable, consistent relationship as Rwanda and the United States. Because within the United States, I'll give you quickly an example affecting Rwanda already. We used to be eligible to AGOA, African Growth Opportunity Act. And then when Rwanda wanted to grow its textile industries, and therefore reduced on the flow of used clothes into Rwanda, some lobbyists, people who are benefiting in the United States from this trade, and by the way, the used clothes, most of it would come from China. And they were selling it to Africa, and they have been doing that, and they were selling those clothes to Rwanda. And when we wanted to grow our industries, so the lobbyists who were benefiting from this used clothes trade actually influenced the powers that be in the United States to strike off AGOA Rwanda so that we came under punishment for just doing that, for wanting to grow economy. So you can see a small country trying to grow its economy, its industries, and has to deal with this situation, then there is a backlash, and we have suffered for that. Of course, there are exemptions. In the past, we have seen PEPFAR that we benefited from greatly, and that's how Rwanda built its health systems. And even that helped us to actually deal with the current pandemic because we established those strong systems, and we were using support from the United States. So, but at the same time, United States also, and that affects Rwanda, is one of the two countries in the whole world that refused to use, say, the terminology that was agreed by everybody in the United Nations, referring to the tragic events that happened in our country as genocide against the Tutsis. And we have never understood why, because we even entered into arguments and said, well, if you are talking about the Holocaust, you are talking about the Holocaust of the Jews. You are not talking about everybody who died during that period when the Jews were being killed under the Holocaust. So, but for some reasons which they have not even explained, they prefer to say, no, yeah, you know, some other people died. We went into arguments, but United States comes out, imagine powerful United States as it is, and is arguing on this non-issue that has been sorted out at the UN. We cannot understand what is behind it or who benefits from it. So this creates an atmosphere of unpredictability, and that's how it becomes difficult for Rwanda, therefore, to predict what is going to happen going forward in terms of relationship. There is also this, sorry?
No, I was just going to say, I think when the official word goes out from a government to go out and kill your neighbor, based on these differences that are tribal or ethnic, or that I think that is a genocidal campaign. So I think we can argue about labels, but I think it's clear to me anyway. I think it's clear to our viewers as well that tragedy in 1994. And one of the points that you made, I think, is really important, which is, for us to be effective working together, you need a sustained long-term approach to the challenges that we're facing. And you mentioned PEPFAR. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that later. But what I'd like to hear is maybe what's your vision, for Rwanda, but also for the continent, and what's necessary for Africa to fulfill the role that you envision, because I think hearing that from you could provide some opportunities for the United States to work together across the continent and with Rwanda with a long-term approach and in a sustained manner.
You see, if you look at Rwanda and Africa, we suffer from one fact that there is so much talk about sovereignty, but you find either we don't qualify to have these sovereign rights. Every other person across the world wants to decide either for Rwanda or decide for Africa. And therefore, the best thing is to let Africa and Rwanda be partners with developed countries, powerful countries, and Rwanda or Africa therefore decide on what we want for ourselves going forward. For example, and we are just reminded by this pandemic, when you find that countries are suffering because they do not have health systems built in a manner that will serve them when such a pandemic strikes, Therefore, that means we need to build our health systems. We need to look at climate change that affects us. We need to look at growing our industries. And the United States has a lot to offer in these areas to make Rwanda and Africa be able to stand on their own and strong as partners of the United States. So this is what we would ask any government, any administration of the United States. And I think it has been there for decades as we know it.
President Kagame, President Kennedy expanded U.S. engagement in Africa. Subsequent programs, as you've seen over the years, have increased interactions with the continent. Most recently, the Trump administration's Prosper Africa, which you advised me on and advised President Trump on. But I think one of the most successful was the one you already mentioned, which was George W. Bush's initiative, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR, which, as you know, was aimed at AIDS, but also really a broad range of health security efforts that have provided millions of people with antiviral treatments and supported vaccination programs. Over 100 million meningitis vaccines, for example, in 10 African countries. The malaria initiative, is another, another great example. As we fight the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think the world has noticed that Rwanda has done a particularly good job at containing COVID-19. What would you recommend to President Joe Biden as the top priorities for working with Africa on health security, but then just to get beyond this crisis and to build a better future?
Well, let me start from the current situation and maybe walk it backward. The current situation as it is, here in Rwanda, we have managed to rein in the pandemic in terms of how we have managed it, whether it has been having lockdown when that is necessary, or identifying people, contact tracing, testing, and everything has been done almost according to the rule book, as the science tells us and the professionals have advised us. Now we are in a situation where we are talking of vaccines. Now, something else has come into play that we cannot understand, that is going to affect us for a long time. Nobody in Africa, no country in Africa has access to these vaccines. United States has been rolling out vaccines, Europe, different parts of the world, India, and so on and so forth. Africa is still queuing, waiting online, and wondering when these vaccines will arrive here. There have been many formulas used to see how we can find the vaccines coming to Africa. Nothing has worked as we speak. And people have come up with terms of vaccine nationalism and so on and so forth that has a basis. It has a basis for calling it that. So the new administration would help, therefore, looking at how Africa would also be integrated in this vaccine access as it is globally. But that is the current situation as it is I'm referring to. And if we deal with this emergency situation, then you have to be requesting the United States to look at, so how does Africa stand in terms of preparedness to deal with the pandemics of the future? So that means investing in public health systems, as in fact they did reference to what you've just said about PEPFAR and other efforts. But this time more deliberate and more focused, preparing for things like what we have had or we are having today. And investments from United States that grow the economies of Africa, and Africa becomes a better partner with the United States, and everyone benefits. As I said, growing industries is to deal with the climate issues, it's to deal with public health in general. The administration simply has the tools, and the partners are there waiting to work together with the United States so that we both can benefit, and absolutely benefit. I think United States benefits by having strong partners or productive partners, not partners who have to keep, begging the United States for their livelihoods.
Right. Well, I think you make a really important point. I mean, it's really the right thing to do to take on this problem globally because it's a global problem. But it's also important if we're going to defeat the disease, as we see with this new strain coming out of South Africa, for example. That this is really a problem that has to be solved all around the world. So thanks for that perspective. Mr. President, we share a military background, as you know, and I was very impressed as a young officer of your story. You were at one of my favorite military posts at Fort Leavenworth when you saw your people under tremendous duress during the genocidal campaign against the Tutsis, and you flew to Uganda, took command of forces, and brought security back to your country after that devastation. And, my experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan convinced me that, hey, it's important, obviously, to defeat your enemies militarily, but also you need to consolidate military gains to achieve political outcomes that reduce the drivers of the violence. Now, you've done a remarkable job in Rwanda because you ended a genocidal conflict and ensured stability. And so what I'd like to hear is, what are your thoughts about not only how you did that, but what are the implications for insurgencies and proxy warfare that you see in your neighborhood, persisting in your neighborhood? And I thought maybe you could help explain as well, what are the drivers of conflict in the Great Lakes region? And what lessons from your experience might you share that are important to building peace in the Great Lakes region and beyond?
Well, it all starts with governance, state structures, and how these serve the citizens. You will find most of these problem areas are areas where there are governance issues that need to be addressed, obviously addressed by the people of those countries and their leaders and so on and so forth. So, but you'd always find in the areas of insurgencies, like we have in the region, that closely associated with those governance issues I'm talking about are citizens benefiting from or getting services from government or state structures. Are these states serving their people, connected to their people? Do they have the trust of their people? So that links well with what you have mentioned, McMaster, that referring to my own background. My family went into exile when I was 4 years old and ran into the neighboring country of Uganda. Others went to different countries in the region and beyond. The product of that has a history. Of that has history in itself which produced it. It starts with colonial times, and which colonial times only knew divide and rule. They would find a society and start finding ways to divide that so that they can entrench themselves deeper or really deny people to work together and cooperate. So when we came back to the country, we knew the responsibility, first of all, was to build the nation of Rwanda back to what it used to be even before the colonial times. But that is not enough, and you cannot achieve it unless there are you are consistent and practical with these underlying values, where you have the people, you think of their interests and what brings them together, what meets their aspirations, what improves their livelihoods. Now, so when there is a lack of that consistency in terms of governance that takes care of the citizens, and sometimes leaders serving in any state structures only take care of themselves and not the citizens, that is sure to produce some of the things we are talking about in terms of insurgency. So the way to deal with insurgencies and extremism and conflicts is to create a situation where these governance structures meet and address the needs of the citizens. In which case, if that is done correctly, these groups that are there behind such extremism will actually find no place to live or to hide. And that's what we have been consistent with in terms of addressing our historical and the issues we inherited. Because we addressed and engaged and reached out to our people and listened. And we did not come pretending that we are going to deliver solutions to them, but we wanted and showed that we wanted to work with them so that we find solutions to the problems that affect us all. We have always steered away from having leaders as one group of people, and then the citizens are there on their own to fend for themselves.
Well, Mr. President, you brought that philosophy with you. I remember when you went in to serve as the chairperson of the African Union from 2018 to 2019, and you took that philosophy of, hey, these conflicts are essentially political into that job, and you merged, as I recall, the political sectors and the peace and security work. And how do you think, as you look back on that time, how do you think your efforts have helped the union? What remains to be done? What role can the African Union play in this kind of peace building as well? And we have the incoming chairman of the African Union coming up, President Felix Tshisekedi of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I just wonder what advice you'd give him. What do you think you accomplished? What remains to be done, and what advice would you give the new chairman of the African Union?
It was a pleasant duty for me to be the chair of the African Union in 2018. And therefore, guided by that philosophy we're talking about, and many other things happening around the globe, the discussion among leaders of Africa, and which I happened to stress with them, and they were all in agreement, and in fact, wanted so badly to get moving on this, was to say, if you look at what is happening around the world, Africa remains marginalized because, one, we have remained divided just as individual countries, and it becomes easier to manipulate one country and sometimes one against the other. And there are many actors who get involved in that for different reasons of their own interests. So we decided that we are going to come together, strengthen the African Union, actually make African Union not just unified, but also effective and efficient in management of its affairs. And then that way we can easily confront the challenges facing us. And in fact, in even forging ahead with partnerships, we are better off. Big market they are going to invest in, it's more attractive than if you have to go dealing with the rules and the different things that are completely out of what we need to be doing with each country. So I'm sure President Tshisekedi, who is becoming the new chair of the African Union, and we are ready to give him moral support in the interests of our continent and all of us, has this in mind, has where he's coming from, that Africa has already made headways and strengthened the African Union, reformed it. I still have that responsibility to continue with the reforms as to what remains to be done with the African Union. But the real aim is stand strong, be effective, be efficient, create productive partnerships, and no doubt Tshisekedi will be assisted and to achieve that objective for all of us.
Hey, well, thanks for that, Mr. President. You know, I think one of the obstacles that you're facing, that the continent is facing, to realizing that vision, is the growing terrorism threat across the continent. And you know, you and I have both seen the horrors of war close up, and it's heartbreaking to see, you know, the terrorist activity from the G5 Sahel region to northeastern Nigeria to Libya to Somalia. And I wonder if you might share, what is your perspective on jihadist terrorism in Africa, and what will it take to defeat terrorist organizations and to address the causes, right, that produce some support, you know, for these murderous groups like Al Qaeda and Al Shabaab and Boko Haram?
My experience and lessons learned, I find that it takes a combination of, again, it goes back to these different countries where insurgencies, extremism, all kinds of things happening. What makes these countries unstable to be able to produce that kind of situation? It goes back to governance. It goes back to state capacity to actually do things that prevent that from emerging. So the fact that we have those trouble spots is an indication that certainly there have been many failures in our governance structures around the continent or in specific countries that are concerned. So, but the combination I'm talking about is, if therefore it's governance, but it's also capacity to actually confront them, because these ones use arms, they use all means to create this insecurity and instability in the areas where they operate. So they have to be confronted in that way, but not just this, because confrontation alone will not produce good results, even if you have the capacity. You have to go beyond that to analyze what are the root causes and address them. Most of them will be political, or they will stem from these governance problems I was talking about. So we will have to find ways every time of using a combination of the capacity to confront these groups with the power of the military or other operations, but at the same time addressing the political issues that fuel these groups to continue to exist or even have influence, because sometimes they have influence on the population. And they use, in fact, in most cases, the weaknesses of governments where they operate. They say, oh, the country is not serving you, it is serving other interests, or it's serving families, or serving this or that. So, and people start finding some solace in association with armed groups. Now, the other third factor that is important is cooperation. How do countries cooperate? Because we have found out that most of these activities are cross-border. One time it is in Somalia, then it flows into Kenya or flows into Ethiopia, or it goes as far as, countries in Tanzania, Mozambique, and we are finding all kinds of groups. Then you go to Central African Republic, you go to Sahel countries. It's everywhere. So individual countries need to be assisted, whether by other African countries and more so by the outside world that many times has means to provide to deal with this situation, or in actual fact, some of them even associated with these groups.
Yeah.
Yes,
they're interconnected. I think sometimes, Mr. President, we try too hard to disconnect the dots and think of them as little separate groups, because they are very, very well connected these days, thanks to the ease of communications and the ease of encrypted communications in particular.
Absolutely. So then the countries have to come together really to cooperate. The security and the defense establishments have to cooperate across border, but there is nothing that will be more important than understanding the root cause of these insurgencies and extremist groups and so on, and addressing exactly that.
In the area of multinational cooperation for security, you've advocated for that in your own neighborhood as well, and there was hope in 2019 after Rwanda and Uganda in particular signed an MOU to normalize relations. So what do you think has been successful in peace building efforts in the region? What more can be done? Of course, we're seeing reports now of more tensions and violence in the eastern parts of Democratic Republic of Congo. How well is your local diplomacy going to improve security cooperation in the Great Lakes region?
Absolutely. Well, let me say for the Eastern Congo, the situation is not getting worse as such. The situation has been there anyway for now decades. It's just the solutions have been just touch and go. And then one moment things are calm, but the problems have not been addressed. So in other words, they happen in sort of waves periodically. It comes, for 3 years, then another 3 years. There's rare in the, instabilities along the eastern Congo side. And then another 3 years, it is heightened, then it keeps going and coming and going and coming. So I think we need a long-term solution. And the current government in the DRC, under President Tshisekedi, who is becoming the African Union chair this year, has been helpful in terms of being available and responsive and wanting to work with the neighbors so that this problem is addressed. I think that is absolutely necessary, and we think we can get better results with that than we have had in the past. So that is on the Eastern Congo side. But of course, Eastern Congo again has to be looked at not only just as Eastern Congo, because it is not a country on its own. Eastern Congo is not another country. It's part of DRC, and it's part of the region. So it has to be looked at in the general context of the country itself, DRC, and therefore how it can come together and be assisted by neighbors and others beyond to actually address these that are called their own problems.
And as you mentioned, all of these problems have, I guess, there's certain unique drivers of the conflict. But
Yes.
while we have you, and while our viewers and listeners have the opportunity to hear your perspective, could you just
Yes.
give us your thoughts on conflicts a little bit beyond the Great Lakes region, especially the one that's ongoing in Ethiopia, centered on Tigray, as well as other places where you have Rwandan troops deployed, such as South Sudan and in the Central African Republic?
So before I come to that, let me touch on what you alluded. You mentioned something about Uganda. Let me.
Yeah, the 2019 agreement. Yeah, yes.
Yes. So we have. You see, the problems between Rwanda and Uganda again have been there also for quite some time. Only that this time what we had, and we hope will help us resolve the matter, is that we brought it to surface. We started discussing it publicly and openly. Otherwise, things were happening, without necessarily people knowing what the matter is. So, but with Angola and DRC and then Uganda and ourselves, Rwanda, we sat and brought out these issues that have been affecting our relationship. And in that arrangement, we have had a series of discussions to address now again what we brought out as the root causes. We hope that may deliver good results at some point. That's where we are, but those problems have been there for a long time. I will not go into more details because I'm just on one side, and I don't want to prejudice anyone's understanding of what the issue is, but that one we are managing. Now, we have had troops serving under and both the military and police serving under the UN in many parts of the world. It has been Sudan, South Sudan, one time we were in Haiti, then Central African Republic, where we are now. And in fact, as we serve under the UN, we are just not peacekeepers there being told, do this, do that, don't do that. We also bring a bit of experience from our own country during the tragic days, where we can share with the people how to resolve some of the causes of the conflict as they exist. We make an effort to try and understand them in those countries where we serve, and also use our availability under the UN to tell them stories about our own situation and how possibly they could benefit from addressing their problems in certain ways, whether it was in Darfur, in Sudan, then or in South Sudan, and wherever we are deployed. We work with the communities, with the citizens, and even the governments. Through the UN, we tell the UN, if we could do the things like this as a UN contingent or force in any part of the world, we could help bring peace, not just to sit there and wait until peace happens and then we keep it, because that's why some forces have stayed for too long in one place. They are waiting to keep peace that never actually happens. So can we contribute to actually making peace happen? Right. That is what we bring in that contribution. Now,
I'll just say also that goes with your theme of you have to address the political drivers of the conflict, right? Or else you're just treating the symptoms. I think that is exactly the right approach. Absolutely,
we do that. Then for Ethiopian situation, I haven't known of AU or UN or individual countries trying to help in dealing with the matter. It is still just within the country itself of Ethiopia. But of course, it is a very serious situation. It is worrying to everyone who gets to know and hear from what is happening there. It's absolutely worrying. So at some point, there have to be steps to try and address that issue. And if it could start from within the country itself, so much the better. But I think the toll is just getting too high as we see it. In fact, the other problem is that it has been cut off from the rest of the world. Right. People don't even know much about what is happening there in reality, other than the misery and things we see when people have crossed the borders and run into Sudan, or a few people who have been working there with the difficulty, saying what they have seen and heard. It's absolutely worrying, and I hope the United States new administration or the UN or others should be thinking of what we can do together with Africa. Africa needs to be engaged primarily, but it's not as easy to say Africa is going to do this with this, and it's very difficult. But something needs to happen to prevent that, because by the time maybe 1 year or 2 or 3 elapse, we shall find that the toll has been extremely high.
I agree. I think the
urifuza kumenyekanisha ibicuruzwa byawe, ukeneye kumenya aho wagurira ibyo wifuza mu buryo bwihuse kandi bworoshye. dador.com ni urubuga rukorohereza ndetse rukanagufasha kwamamaza no kumenyekanisha ibicuruzwa byawe. Gusura urubuga rwa dador.com kenshi biguhesha kandi amahirwe yo gutsindira iPhone. Hamwe na dador.com birihuta, birizewe kandi biroroshye.